Sometimes, the simplest and most unassuming things can be the most meaningful. An item bursting with symbolism and bound to larger ideals can help to forge an identity. For me, that talisman was a modest piece of cardboard. I discovered it during my early elementary years in Sunday school. It was one of those Karen Kayemet Jewish National Fund slotted holders for quarters. Filling it up meant you would plant a tree in Israel, a living thing to help build the nation that was founded upon Torah as a tree of life. The slotted quarter card was the successor to the iconic blue pushki boxes of the previous generation. I remember the pride I felt when I had collected enough coins to fill the page, knowing that I would have a special bond to a thriving and enduring piece of the land of Israel. And maybe someday I'd travel to this special place and see what I had imagined from afar. Even at that young age, I was beginning to understand the importance of Israel to our people and the fragility of its existence. I felt I was doing something significant, something that linked me to Jews around the world and through the centuries. I was part of the process of willing that dream that was no longer a dream. It was the beginning of my love for the Jewish state and the Zionist ideal, a love that has endured through threat and trial and struggle down to this very moment. Like so many of you, the many quarters I collected over the years for the many trees I planted heightened my anticipation when I eventually planned a trip there. Fortunately, well before I visited the summer of my confirmation year, my illusions of coming across the clearly designated Daniel Weiner honorary JNF Grove were dispelled. A young Zionist version of discovering that there is no Santa Claus. I came of age during what is now being described as the golden age of American Jewry, the second half of the 20th century. It was a time of prosperity and opportunity, of all but vanquished anti-Semitism, and the promise of an American melting pot that had smoothly folded us into its supple pluralism of acceptance. But it was also a golden age for the relationship between American Jews and Israel. Israel was the scrappy underdog, the perennial David to the Goliaths of Jew haters and Arab armies that had sought its destruction from its founding. A ragtag group of pioneers and refugees had the temerity to insist on their place in a world that seemed to have no place for them. It was a miraculous return of a displaced people that, for American Jews still finding their footing, instilled a pride that enabled them to hold their heads high amongst the nations. For American Jews, Zionism was not merely another political ideology or sense of tribal bond to national origin. For the children and grandchildren of the immigrant generation, assimilation and secularism forged a Jewish identity that was often described as more cultural than religious, a bond of peoplehood rather than faith. And for most, Zionism and the State of Israel became the core of Jewish identity and communal commitment. Even in the liberal synagogues in which cultural Jews found spiritual connection, the presence of the Israeli flag with the American flag on this bima testified to the centrality of Zionism to Jewish identity. But in recent years, something has shifted as that bond has been strained. The younger generation has only known an Israel of power and perceived occupation, though the veil of invincibility was certainly pierced on October 7th. But for many of us, who have devoted our lives to and invested our souls in Israel's security and flourishing, the policies of a succession of governments on issues ranging from the peace process to religious pluralism have often pitted our commitment to liberal ideals and Jewish values against the reality of an Israel that seems to be on a dangerous course. Certainly after October 7th, contempt not merely for Israel's policies, but for its very existence has metastasized hand in hand with a marked increase in anti-Semitism. Israel and the Jewish people are under attack from the outside in ways not seen in decades. And Zionism, the perennial boogeyman of UN resolutions and graduate seminars, has once again been cast as the bane of all that is good and just. In this fraught and unprecedented moment of crisis for the state of Israel and for our people worldwide, Zionism has reached a critical inflection point. Its tenets are being eroded from within by settler supremacists, ethno-nationalists, and messianic demagogues. And beyond the Jewish community, anti-Zionists strive to define it as the basis of a pariah state. The radical right wants an Israel that is less democratic, and the lunatic left wants an Israel that is no longer Jewish. Both margins threaten the delicate balance between these principles that have defined Israel's tenuous but tenacious existence thus far. And so, we are at a crossroads as to the future of Zionism in Israel. Those of us who love Israel and feel pride in the authentic principles of Zionism must reclaim it from the hands of those who would pervert its ideals in the name of politics and power. And we must fight those the world over who would denigrate it as a toxic relic of a bygone European nationalism. Some may find this message ill-timed, a conversation better saved for when Israel is not engaged in a hot battle for its survival. And yet, we all realize that the battle against Hamas and Hezbollah is actually part of a larger war against Israel's ultimate enemy, Iran, and by extension, a contest between the West and North Korea, Russia, and China. And so, in this protracted conflict, as Jews who have always cared deeply about how we fight even the most just wars, a reflection on Israel's character is appropriate and vital in guiding its conduct through these perilous times. Okay, let's take a step back and define the terms that we assume we share. Simply put, Zionism is a movement of liberation for the Jewish people, the creation of a refuge from millennia of persecution. It is the full flowering of Jewish self-determination and statehood in our people's ancestral and indigenous homeland. But it is truly much more and goes much deeper. For Zionism is at its core a powerful story for a people rooted in story. It is an unbelievable epic, unique in the annals of human history. It is the story of a small, wayward tribe on the margins of society, whose radical ideas of morality and link to a tiny land sustain them against the murderous visions of their neighbors. And as they came into their own as a people, they are cast from their homeland into exile for 2,000 years. Yet they do not give up on their bond with the land and the tragic memory of this rupture. This people even have the chutzpah to enshrine hopes for a return, though they are powerless and fragmented amongst the haughty empires of the ages. And then, after the darkest moments of its history, when it seemed that all the world had turned its back, this people reestablished itself as a nation, realizing the dreams of its faith in the land of its birth. Though we all know this story, it is important to recount it, for it is a story like no other, because in it lies the essence of what we must reclaim, reaffirm, and recommit to. For Zionism was founded as a balance between the particular and the universal, between a unique expression of the Jewish story and a longing for our people to have a nation like every other nation, for the Jewish state to be a modern democratic state, a proud member amongst the family of nations. Over the last 2 years, our beloved Israel has drifted down a troubling and perilous path. The most radical coalition in Israel's history has driven it from crisis to crisis, from the judicial coup that sought to overturn the democratic process, to the security failures of October 7th, the empowering of settler violence on the West Bank, and the lack of any coherent strategy for a post-war Gaza. Never have Israelis been so divided as a nation and as a people, divisions that its enemies exploited on October 7th. And though the recent victories against Hezbollah and confrontation with Iran have been reassuring, uniting the nation in this current moment of military success, trust in this government more broadly remains compromised. And so, we pray that the success of the moment can be translated into enduring security and diplomatic resolution. Security, especially for those displaced from Israel's north, and diplomatic resolution that would at long last bring home the hostages from the pits of Gaza. There is a quip that is as telling as it is troubling. Israel is too important to be left to Israelis. On one level, Israel is a democracy, and its citizens should be left to decide its leadership through the electoral process. But on another level, Israel is much more than an independent nation-state. It is the beating heart of the Jewish people, the living embodiment of our defining story. We Jews support and invest in and fight for Israel in ways that rival our commitment to America. And so, we have more than a stake in Israel's security and survival. We have an obligation to secure its soul. And so, in the longer term, we must raise our voices, use our influence, and leverage our resources to support an Israel that aligns with our Jewish values and our civic principles. For as the largest, most powerful, and best established Jewish community in the world, we have a responsibility to join with millions of Israelis in rising to meet this challenge to our beloved homeland. To sit idly by, to assume that this is merely an internal political matter, or to insist that standing with Israel demands our silence in the face of its struggles, is to be complicit in enabling the decay of Israel into something unrecognizable. In the aftermath of the Yom Kippur War, the near catastrophic destruction of Israel, the nation embraced a heshbon nefesh, an accounting of its soul. Hard and uncomfortable questions were asked. Tough conversations ensued. Leaders resigned, and the nation reimagined its course moving forward. If Israelis and world Jewry do not engage in similar soul-searching in the aftermath of the even more horrific events of October 7th, I fear for what lies ahead. An equally daunting challenge for our people is the compelling need to address the external threats to Israel and Zionism. The anti-Zionist schemes that emerged decades ago have grown into something more pernicious to both Israel and global Jewry. In many ways, anti-Zionism is the latest in a long line of variations on mutating anti-Semitism. Jews have always suffered the castigation of the world as the embodiment of the sins of the moment. For pagans of a pluralistic pantheon, we were intolerant monotheists. For Christendom, we were Christ killers. For communists, we were greedy cosmopolitans, and for fascists, we were a plague upon the race. And now, when the ultimate transgression lies in the power and privilege of a world cleaved between oppressed and oppressor, the marks of Cain that are wielded are apartheid, colonialist, ethnic cleansing, and genocide. But in a world in which the once diffuse existence of Jews can now be concerted into one place that signifies the whole, Israel has become the epitome of all evil. Anti-Zionists can be divided into three groups. The first are rank anti-Semites, those who are using the cover of anti-Zionism to mask base hatred of Jews. When confronted with facts and history, their ignorance and resort to rhetoric reveals their true intentions. In many ways, they are beyond the pale as they've always been. There is no messaging or strategy other to unmask, to marginalize, and to isolate them from the company of civil discourse. The second group of anti-Zionists are those who have imbibed the identity politics of the moment, the illiberal melange of post-colonialism, postmodernism, and intersectionality that has tainted the minds of too many of our young in too many institutions of higher education. In essence, their brand of anti-Zionism is an attempt to do to Jews what our current moment of identity politics would never allow for any other minority people. They want to tell us who we are. They want to tell us what we should fear and what we can't fear. They want to deny us our story and make it part of their story. We must confront these anti-Zionists publicly and call them out on their disinformation and lies so that we can set the record straight with the wider public and replace propaganda with truth. We cannot merely absent ourselves from these conversations because they happen in places and amongst groups in which our voices must be heard and our presence must be felt. In the post-October 7th world, those of us who worked in progressive spaces and movements were rudely awakened to the silence or rebuke of those with whom and for whom we worked for decades. The recent Wing Luke debacle is just the most public act evoking a sense of frustration and betrayal. It is a painful clarity that is vital to knowing with whom we will work in the future. But there are many amongst these progressives who are not malicious, but merely uneducated. They are open to hearing from us and must hear from us. But more importantly, we must not concede our liberal values nor abdicate our responsibilities to confront injustice out of spite, bitterness, or disappointment in the ignorance of our friends. The final cohort of anti-Zionists are perhaps the most heartbreaking, but the most crucial for us to engage. It is the Jewish anti-Zionists. Amongst them, growing numbers of our children and our grandchildren. Now, I am not counting in this number the leadership of organizations like Jewish Voice for Peace, who actively work with those seeking to undermine Israel and thus endanger the Jewish people. I am talking about many of those who came of age in our community, those who heard our lessons, sang our songs, and studied our texts about tikkun olam, repairing the world. They were steeped in a sense of Jewish identity, rooted mainly in caring for the weak, the vulnerable, and the oppressed. And so, it is not surprising that they see Jewish values as compelling them to support beleaguered Palestinians over perceived Israeli power. Some of this is attributable to the romantic idealism of youth, coupled with gaps in their understanding of history. But in many ways, we failed this generation by not striking a better balance between teaching tikkun olam and cultivating Ahavat Yisrael, a love for the Jewish people. We cannot dismiss or sit shiva for these young people because they are our people. They are our children and our grandchildren. They are the future of American Judaism. We can better prepare them from a very early age to balance passion for universal justice with a special regard for their fellow Jews. We can reinforce for them that these two virtues are not mutually exclusive, but actually complementary. That the very values they cherish that compel them to strive for justice, righteousness, and peace arose from the heart of the Jewish community and the Jewish experience, our people's greatest contribution to human civilization. Most importantly, we must keep our doors, our institutions, our minds, and our hearts open to them. We must be willing to listen, even if it is uncomfortable and painful. For in the very act of connection and presence, we validate who they are. We demonstrate that we hear what they are saying. We earn opportunities to expand and deepen their understanding. And we declare that they will always have a place in our Ohel Ha'am, the sacred tent of the Jewish people. Before there was Israel the nation or Israel the land, we were Israel the people, deriving our name from Jacob's transformative fight with a divine being on that lonely night along the river Yabok. The name he was given as the sun rose, Yisrael, is a name that became our eternal identity, a name that means that we are destined to strive and to struggle, destined to wrestle with God and to grapple with humanity, destined to search our souls, to grow and to learn and to evolve, and destined to emerge from these struggles refined, renewed, and recommitted. On that first trip to Israel, the summer of my confirmation year, I remember my first visit to the Kotel, the remaining section of the wall of the ancient temple in Jerusalem. It is a powerful experience to actually be in the presence of something you've only seen and imagined. I walked up and touched its craggy sandstone. I placed an adolescent prayer in a crack between the blocks, and my mind immediately went to my grandpa Joe. Joe Kricksfeld was a Russian immigrant who built a life, a business, and a family in Omaha, Nebraska. He read the Vorwärts, the Jewish paper, every day over his glass of tea with lemon, more for his connection to his Yiddish upbringing than an embrace of socialist ideology. And he loved the state of Israel, though he never had visited it. He and I would argue over some of the earliest attempts at the peace process with the Palestinians, I with my naive, left-leaning idealism of the pursuit of peace at almost any cost, and he with an unqualified support for Israel's security, a skepticism born of both the lessons of the Holocaust and his memories of Russian intolerance. But as I was standing at the Kotel, all I could think about was how deeply I hoped that he would visit Israel as I had the privilege of doing then, that he would realize the dreams of countless generations of Chovevei Zion, of lovers of Zion whose passion and hope sustain them beyond any possibility of standing in that holy place. And a few years later, before Alzheimer's robbed him of his humanity, he did visit Israel. And in the photos of that visit, there was something that I rarely saw in him: a smile, a gleam in the eye, a sense of having attained something longed for but finally embraced. We are of the generations who have witnessed what 100 before us could only imagine. The Zionist vision of 3 millennia was miraculously reborn in our lifetimes. For many, it is easy to take this ideology, this movement, and the nation it forged for granted. But like any living, vibrant, and dynamic thing worth preserving, it must be guarded and tended. It must be reimagined and re-envisioned. It must be pruned of its decay and fortified with new energy, new purpose, and new hope. May we rise to this crucial moment for the Zionist movement, the State of Israel, and for the Jewish people. May we have the courage of our convictions, the willingness to have hard conversations, and the fortitude to take tough decisions. And may the generations that come after us behold a new light sown for Zion, a light of righteousness and of goodness, a light of blessing and of compassion, a light of just power and of enduring peace. Ken Yehi Ratzon, may this be God's will, and let us say, Amen.